Kia ora koutou katoa, a ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Te whare nei he taonga Israel Museum, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui to Ido and Dorette and Gilad, congratulations, Norm, and to the rest of the museum. I'd just like to thank you so much for affording me the great honour of being able to stand on these lands and to share an artwork that I've been actually working on for 12 years now. So I've got greyer, older, wider, while making this in pursuit of Venus. So this image here was a business card, the first business card I made in the process of creating this work. And I've taken a very small section of James Cook's drawing of the transit of Venus when he was in Tahiti 250 years ago on a scientific adventure and a series of explorations that changed the world. In fact, at this point in time, only 3/4 of the globe had been mapped, and one of James Cook's great successes was to become a cartographer, and he managed to fill in the last 25% of the globe because, of course, there was this idea that the Earth was round and it was held in place by the El Dorado of the south instead of Antarctica being made of snow. Big snowy mountains, there was this idea that there was a whole lot of gold at the bottom of the earth. And so James Cook initially set out to record the transit of Venus, a project that was a very global scientific moment in time where many, many different cultures were sending scientists across the globe to look for the transit of Venus. The reason that they wanted to do this was to set, to work out how far the Earth was, where it sat in the world, and to set latitude. And in doing so, being able to create the highways and byways, or the Google Maps of this time. So what I thought I would share with you today is just some background information about the creation of this work. I was very inspired by seeing the wallpaper, of which there's a complete set in the Australian National Gallery in Canberra. And my partner James, who's accompanying me, he actually saw this first and came and grabbed me to come and look at this kind of strange illustration, this idea of what the Pacific and Aotearoa and what New Zealand looked like. And we marvelled at this beautiful but very incorrect piece of wallpaper. I love this image here because for me it's about technology through time. In fact, I've had several iPhones since the time that this image was taken, and but I do love it because, in a way, when I think about the creation of this work, I am standing on the shoulders of other people who created the wallpaper in the first place. The entrepreneur Dufour, who made Les Sauvages de la Mer Pacifique, of which Dorrit spoke to us about. And what I love about the wallpaper is the histories that are embodied in this piece. It's a French piece, and it talks about the time there was a shift from tapestry making to woodblock printmaking of wallpapers. So in effect, it's about us beautifying the interiors of our homes. It also talks about the development of paper, because for the first point in time, long strips of paper were being developed, which created the opportunity to make large panoramic printed pieces. And these are very much based on paintings of the time, history paintings. But for me, my shock, I suppose, was seeing these very fictitious and glamorous and well-adorned and costumed Pacific peoples that really didn't look like anything that I could recognise. So I decided that I wanted to do something about this. The far image on the right-hand side there's a very small component in the wallpaper which shows a Maori chief. And what that Maori chief is doing is he's looking at the death of Captain Cook in Hawaii. So I think it's a very interesting thing, this idea that the wallpaper collapses time and space and different cultures into this kind of fictional plane. And the fact that Captain Cook, his death appears in the wallpaper, gave me, it's kind of the rupture, the strange moment in the wallpaper, which I wanted to sort of take on and replicate, because Captain Cook is seen as the harbinger of colonisation, and certainly empire, the moment of empire and the British coming down to Australia in particular to set up a penal colony, and New Zealand was considered that it would become the fruit bowl for England, who was experiencing this new industrial age. So that chief, I suppose, is me looking back into the wallpaper. And so I went about trying to work out how to bring this wallpaper to life. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. And this was our very first test shoot. It was really cute because there is a film school in Auckland called the South Seas Film School. And so this is where we undertook our first test to see how we might use this digital illustration that I had a Russian illustrator make for me, and trying to use it to insert figures into this piece. So I'm using a very old technique. It's called green screen. Most people would understand it when you're watching on television and someone's reading the weather. They're actually standing in front of a very, almost like a billiard table, in fact. It's not a very wonderful colour to spend weeks in front of, but you extract the green and leave the figure behind. So this is, as you can see, it's a very early rendition, me just testing to see how I might be able to think about the technology and how I could populate this wallpaper and create a space that I could invite actors, performers, and the talent into. The work has taken such a long time because there was the global financial crisis hit the world, and I decided, I suppose for me, a really political act in the production of this work was to not let outside economic forces change the scale and the drama that I wanted to create by remaking this wallpaper. But in the process, I was able to undertake a residency. This is a photo board of a wall in Montalvo, where I was looking at some of the illustrations and some of the characters who were involved with Captain Cook, Joseph Banks, the Tahitian navigator Tupaia, and I just spent months thinking about them, reading about them, and dreaming about them, and trying to work out how I could possibly afford to bring all these people together and create this work. And for me, it was also thinking about the Western characters and what happened on board ships of this time, how you kept your crew in line through the use of whipping on the decks, and that there would be a constabulary, which are the Marines or the Redcoats, and thinking about what their life was like on board the Endeavour. A very important figure in the history. He's a very important figure for us in the Pacific Islands. And just to let you know that, so I'm of Maori descent through my father. And so Maori is part of the Pacific nations, and that goes right through from Tahiti to the Cook Islands, Fiji. There's many, many different cultures that are kind of encapsulated in that area. And there's a common language denominator that works through the Pacific. And Tupaia is a figure that Joseph Banks and Captain Cook met in Tahiti, and he was a great explorer, a very high-born and very knowledgeable man who accompanied them on their ship. And I love this illustration on the left-hand side, because to me what this represents is the first time a Pacific person is taking on Western illustration techniques. And he's doing drawings of different figures and different characters that he saw along the way. And this is the Chief Mourner costume, of which is a very dramatic and very complex costume, which took me a couple of years how to work out how to make one, because we don't have a complete set in New Zealand, and also the materials that it's made from do not exist in New Zealand. So it was quite a complex task trying to go about creating these pre-colonial costumes and ideas. And at the time that I was working on this, I had friends who were writing books, and my friend Therese Mangos had found this little illustration called The Bride of Mangaia. So I wanted to replicate that as well. I was looking at the costume design, and what I love about it is the idea is the body as a vessel. And so this is, in fact, a male on the left-hand side in this original illustration, and he is being betrothed and is in the process of being married. But as in this moment and during this ritual, he cannot touch the land. So he's walking across the backs of, they could be slaves or villagers or other people. So I thought this was a very interesting idea that I wanted to also recreate in the work. I worked with many costume designers and collected many materials in order to kind of create a feeling of coming from a different period in time. So these are just some images backstage. This is my niece, Ruby, and I always like to work with family because family is very important to me, and she works in the theatre world, and so I asked you to help me find some actors. And then that's her father, my brother, Des, and he's a chef, and he helped me find a hunter. So I commissioned a hunter to go and find a pig, and this is called a Captain Cook pig. And it was one of the things that Captain Cook did as he travelled through the islands. They traded chickens, pigs, goats as food, and they were leaving them behind so that when they came back they would have food sources as they travelled around the world. And so it was really interesting to commission a pig, and because they're quite hard to find. So this man, Taran, went into the bush. I said, I'm shooting next weekend. You need to get this. It has to be fresh because I can't have people holding on to it if it's too old. And so it was quite, it's just the kind of detail that I wanted to bring to people because they're quite a different look. So this is a very ancient, old-style pig that came from England. And then I went about sort of meeting a whole lot of different actors, both of Western and Pacific descent. And we spent a lot of time together talking about the sort of ideas, the things that happened to Captain Cook as he travelled through the islands, the things that he encountered. And I think it's that moment of wonder is really interesting in terms of looking at this work. And when you see it, some of you may have seen it already, that thing of trying to decipher what is in front of you and encountering different cultures. I got hair and makeup, worked with a whole group of people who were creating wigs and headdresses, because of course the highborn chiefs and chieftainesses, there's a particular way that they look, and of course, you know, there's a way that it signifies a hierarchy within the tribes and the villages. So we spent much time putting together these various costumes. I would time some of my video shoots when, so there's a festival that we call Pacifica. It's an annual festival, and I wanted to work with Kumu Blaine, who is from Hawaii, and he teaches hula. He has a hula school in Hawaii, so I invited his dance group to come and perform in the work. These headdresses are taken from, they're very important. It's a flower called the pahutakawa, from the pahutakawa tree. And so it signifies, it only flowers for a short period of time. And the bright red colour is something that Pacific people, red is a chiefly colour. So to put red on your head signifies status. So, and also people who are watching it will know what season some of these scenes are recorded in just by looking at the types of costume that people are wearing. And so while people were getting dressed on in the backstage where we were in the studio, we beamed up some images from in front of the green screen. I also was very lucky that a Hawaiian tattoo artist was travelling in New Zealand at the time, and so she undertook making the man from Bora Bora's tattoo. And so it took about 10 hours to get, Ali's about 6'4", so he's very tall, he's a very big person. So just to cover his body, even using pens, took the whole day before we could record the scene that I wanted him to be in. This is my recreation of the Bride of Mangaia scene, and I also worked with a choreographer, because one of the things that I was really struggling with, or was very aware of in the terms of making a work such as this, is the ethics of inviting Pacific people who have been colonised and who have a lot of issues around Captain Cook and this particular moment in time, was how to bring people into the project and not take away their own IP for the, you know, there's a lot of dance groups that have money, create an income from the performance work. So I also brought a choreographer in, and sometimes we'd invite people into the studio space and we'd devise a dance at that moment in time. And so what that meant is we had something unique for our project, but also not taking away from the various groups. And it's not a great image, but because this, it's like the Three Graces, which is from the original wallpaper. They're actually not so big in the wallpaper. They're quite small. And I worked with a group of 3 women. So I really wanted to sort of look at this idea and resist the idea that Pacific bodies are available, and that actually the process and the cultural ceremonies that we undertake are for our own, they inspire ourselves and they're for our own cultural good. This is a Hawaiian seated hula dance, and recreated this. This is a French illustration, and I worked with a woman called Aruna Poaching, who really wanted to represent this image here. So this gives you a sense of what it looked like in the studio. And I spent probably about 4 or 5 days working, shooting about 40, 45 different scenes, scripted scenes. And it's very strange when you're... I had a moment to look at the Tyrrell piece outdoors, but when you're working in it's much brighter than it looks here, but you get this, you lose your sense of distance. So it's quite a tough place to spend 12 hours working with various actors as they come through. But it was a really nice opportunity. I suppose this work is really looking back in time at these historical times. It's utilising this kind of wallpaper as a support system, but really what I'm working at is a very high level of technology at the same time. So I was able to work with different artists. We work with a Pacific artist, Junior, who's a 3D model maker. So all the waka or the canoes that you see in the work are actually made inside a computer. And then my partner James, who's travelling with me, he worked on the soundtrack, and it was kind of scary when we first heard the work, because we spent many, many years putting these various scenes together. I came up with a way of trying to imagine where the scenes are and how we might be able to think about creating a 32-minute soundtrack. So I printed the scenes across here so we could kind of work through and work out where the various stories and songs and things were happening. And we only actually heard the soundtrack for the first time probably a month or so before it first showed in Auckland, and it was an absolute cacophony. It was a nightmare, actually. We just... Suddenly, every scene was turned on, and so we needed to kind of pull it back so you could hear the contrast between Western music, Pacific waiata and song, the storytelling, the elements that make it feel like you're outdoors, like the sea waves and the birds. So that's just one way that I could sort of start to work my way through it. And I was lucky enough for this work to be selected to represent New Zealand, the Venice Biennale in 2017. And what was wonderful for us is that we showed in this building here, which is called the Tessa del Isolotto, which means little island, which seemed to make sense for us. But it's the oldest building in the Arsenale, and it's written about in Dante's Inferno. So it was a wonderful place to stage this work. It was right next to the water. And so what I wanted to use this project, now that it's been completed, I've spent a lot of time encountering different actors and meeting many, many different people who've helped me think through what exists in the work, but now it becomes an object in the world, and it becomes a way, like a handshake for me. It's a way I can meet different people and involve their kind of ceremonies as well. So we worked with the Querini Yacht Club in Venice. So I had to go training with them while we were installing the work. And it's we're on the boat that we're on is actually a treasure of Venice. It's the biggest gondola. And so when we bought it out and took it out onto the waters, it was really wonderful to see the Venetians come out and enjoy seeing their boat on the water. It only comes out once a year. So we launched it very early one morning. It weighs 2 tons, and I think there was about 8 of us hauling it into the water. And then we spent time working with the rowers, and it was wonderful using that as a entrance into the opening of the exhibition. This is an image of the work, which is downstairs. I've also taken this work to a number of different places in Australia, and Australia is a really important part of Captain Cook's stories and for them too. And what was fantastic about showing this work in Perth is I met the Aboriginal elder. He's closest to me on that right-hand photograph, and he was the first man to kind of set a contemporary way of doing what they call welcome to country. So we did a welcome to country, which is to really reflect upon the people of the land and the way that they would like to host and invite people to stand on their land. So that's an image from the opening there. In this exhibition, I also made a series of telescopes. It was interesting hearing about photography. What I wanted to do is to remind people of the techniques of looking through a telescope. The work was shown in Venice, and of course Galileo, he was the designer of some of the best telescopes and actually did record the transit of Venus. And what I was doing with the optics of the telescopes is when you look through them, there's little photographs of Indigenous peoples and costumes, a number of different things. But I also wanted to remind people, nowadays people are taking selfies and they're holding phones far away from themselves to get people in there. I wanted to remind the idea of cameras and looking closely at through these optical devices, or perspectival tubes as they were known at that time. In Perth, they also had a very small section of the wallpaper, and it was an opportunity to also show these are Joseph Banks's specimen cabinets. They're very beautiful, and it was the first time that they've been shown in Australia. They've been bought in an auction, but the special thing about them was that they were made of red cedar that was collected on James Cook's first voyage and then turned into cabinets in Britain. So this project, In Pursuit of Venus, has been really wonderful for me and for the institutions that I've been working with, because it gives them opportunities to show it in various different ways and include different parts of the collections and really make us think about what does history mean for us today. Recently I've had a big exhibition called Cinemania, looking at 30 years of my video practice, and we put the work on the curved wall, which is kind of an interesting thing, very all-encompassing. But I also showed a series of portraits, and so I wanted to, while I was making the video, I also wanted to create these images of some of the characters that I was recording. And there's a proposition, the work is actually 64 minutes long. There's two 32-minute lengths. And in one of the scenes, Captain Cook is played by a woman. And why is she a woman? I wanted to talk about points of view. Pacific people weren't sure if Captain Cook was male or female because he wore breeches, and our clothing was very, very different. He was a Quaker and quite a principled man, so he wasn't sleeping with anybody that he was encountering as he was going through the islands. And there's one scene in Pursuit of Venus, Infected, where a Pacific man goes to pull down his breeches to see what gender he is. And so I've swapped that scene out, and so every 32 minutes there's one where it's a female. And the reason I did that is because this woman, Julia, she's a curator at the Auckland Art Gallery. She's 6'4", and her nickname when she was at high school was Cook. So I really wrote this particular scene with her in mind and thinking about that whole idea of gender, but also that there are many, many different ways of looking at things, and they can be simultaneous. And I hope that this work provides a sense of empathy and wonder, and it's my pleasure to be able to show it here at the Israel Museum. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.